Hello and welcome to the Al-Attiyah Foundation podcast. My name is Naweed Jabakil. Today we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Alexandra Soezer. Since March 2024, Dr. Soezer is the director of the Climate Action Centre of Excellence based in Doha, Qatar. Launched at the 28th Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC in the UAE, known as COP28, CACE provides countries with technical assistance to enter carbon markets and project developers with the integration of carbon finance in their reduction and removal projects. The centre's aimed at mobilizing climate and carbon finance, providing value for money for investors through auctions and generating new projects across the globe. Dr. Soezer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Thanks very much. Very happy to have you. Let's begin then by just an introduction, if you like, of yourself as well as your current role as director of the CACE. Just tell us about your professional journey and what inspired you to specialize in climate change mitigation and carbon finance.
Yeah, so I'm currently the director of the Climate Action Centre of Excellence, or CACE, which was launched at COP28 in Dubai. As already mentioned, it is hosted by the Gulf Organization for Research and Development in Doha. Our mission is to help countries prepare to participate in international carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, while also creating the enabling environment for new climate projects and investments. So we provide the technical expertise, the institutional support, and the partnerships that allow governments and private investors to mobilize carbon finance and scale actions on the ground. As for my professional journey, I worked for more than 20 years in the field of climate change mitigation, energy, and carbon finance, with a focus on turning policy into action on the ground. Much of my career has been with the United Nations Development Programme, where I designed and managed large-scale carbon finance initiatives that supported countries in developing sustainable energy and climate projects. And so what inspired me to specialize in this area is the realization that carbon finance, if structured well, can be one of the most powerful levers to accelerate global climate action. So carbon markets have the potential not only to reduce emissions cost effectively, but also to channel resources toward countries that need them the most.
And there's been a lot of attention when it comes to the Conference of the Parties, COPs as they're known. There's an upcoming one, of course, scheduled to take place in Brazil in the coming weeks, but still large segments of the general public at least struggle with understanding the point of these conferences. Bearing that in mind, just clarify what the Paris Agreement is for our listeners, and in particular, the significance of Article 6.
Yes, this is a very important question because the Paris Agreement and the annual COP conferences can, of course, sometimes feel a little bit abstract to people who are not directly involved in climate negotiations. So the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, and it is essentially the world's climate action plan. So almost every country on Earth signed on to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. Each country sets its own targets, so what we call the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, and then reports on progress. So the Paris Agreement provides the broader framework, but it relies on countries taking concrete steps at home, but also cooperating internationally. And that's where Article 6 comes in. It is one of the most innovative parts of the Paris Agreement because it allows countries to collaborate through carbon markets. And in practice, this means that if one country reduces emissions beyond its target, for example, by investing in renewable energy or reforestation, it can transfer those additional reductions to another country that needs them to meet its goal. And these internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, or ITMOs, can create flexibility and reduce the costs of climate action. And importantly, also help to channel finance and technology to places where it can have really a big impact. And at the COPs, governments, negotiators, and civil society, they all come together in one place and finalize the rules that can then unlock billions of dollars in finance and set also the pace for cooperation.
And it's one of the most innovative areas, but it's also regarded as one of the most technically complex when it comes to the agreement, and politically sensitive as well. Tell us a bit about how CACE is facilitating readiness assistance for the people you're working with, the organizations, as well as project pipeline development and public-private matchmaking, which is really important.
Yeah, so you are absolutely right. Article 6 is both. It's technically really complex and it is also politically sensitive. And that's why readiness and capacity building are so critical. And this is exactly where CACE focuses its work on. So we provide readiness assistance to by supporting governments in setting up the regulatory and institutional frameworks they need to participate in Article 6. That includes helping the relevant line ministries develop clear authorization procedures, fee structures, tracking instruments, and align reporting to UNFCCC with their national climate commitments. But without those basic structures, countries cannot engage confidently or attract investment at scale. And then on the project pipeline side, we work with governments and private developers to identify and prepare projects that can generate high integrity carbon credits. And this can be renewable energy projects, energy efficiency, waste to energy, clean cooking, or any other green technology initiative. And third, we also see that governments and developers often need strong partnerships and also very practical tools to make projects more impactful. And here we partner with mSearch, which brings cutting-edge transaction technology to the table. And together we developed the so-called A6 tracker. It is a readiness and a matchmaking toolkit that helps market actors to diagnose policy and system gaps. And we also run A6 Assist, which is a global help desk linked directly with designated national authorities or DNAs. It is very simple and a practical partnership because DNAs can contact us via WhatsApp, and we provide fast hands-on support to governments directly or to developers. And this can be related, for example, to authorization procedures or reporting processes.
So, it's brilliant to hear. Yeah, it's brilliant to hear that it's incredibly accessible, even via WhatsApp. I wanted to pick up on one of the main concerns and complaints we hear about the agreement, the Paris Agreement, and the COP process. Is lots of countries in the developing world say that it's unfair that richer nations, somehow the developed world is trying to impose these targets on them and it's hindering their development process. Do you think that the transfer of emission reductions between states and companies that you mentioned earlier, you alluded to, that internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, as they're known, 6.2 in the Paris Agreement, could they represent a viable solution to reducing some of those concerns?
So first of all, I think the concern is very real and it has been voiced for many years. Countries in the global south are understandably cautious when climate targets are perceived as restrictions, especially when those same countries are still striving to grow their economies, reduce poverty, or expand access to energy, because development cannot and should not be sacrificed in the name of climate action. But this is where Article 6.2 and the transfer of emission reductions through ITMOS can actually really help to bridge the gap, because the mechanism is designed to create mutual benefit. When a country or a company in the global north purchases ITMOS, they are not just buying a verified credit on paper, they are financing real technology transfer and sustainable development projects in the global south. So this can, for example, as already mentioned before, be a renewable energy project, a clean cooking solution, waste to energy initiatives, and so on. But the host country gains new infrastructure and technology, jobs, and makes also progress on its own climate goals. And at the same time, the investing country gains access to cost-effective, verified emission reductions that help to meet its targets. And the key is to make this mechanism really work, integrity and sovereignty. Article
Yeah.
6. Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
just to pick up on that for our listeners, I wanted to give a concrete example because theoretically you've outlined the benefits and how they work. But let's just take one example. The aviation sector, for example, receives a lot of attention when it comes to pollution. There's the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation that's in place. One might expect, for example, very successful international airlines from countries without large populations, such as those in the Gulf Cooperation Council, to purchase mitigation outcomes from other countries or entities. In those cases, the originating country isn't really able to count these transferred mitigation outcomes towards their own nationally determined contributions or NDCs. And mechanisms of this nature, they realistically require a high degree of international cooperation, trust, as well as rigorous measurements, reporting, and verification. How do you think, in practice, these perspectives are effective and viable when it comes to these arrangements?
Yeah, so this is a really excellent question because it goes right into the heart of how international carbon markets are supposed to function. The aviation sector, through CORSIA, is one of the most visible examples of demand for carbon credits. And we do expect international airlines, including those from the Gulf region, such as Qatar Airways, to be active buyers of CORSIA credits. And once such a credit is transferred, the originating country can no longer count it toward its own NDC target. So this principle of corresponding adjustments is really at the core of Article 6. It is critical because it prevents double counting and ensures environmental integrity. But it also means that countries must carefully consider which emission reductions they transfer and which they retain for their own NDCs. This makes Article 6 so important, so credible. The effectiveness of these arrangements rests on two main pillars. First, international cooperation. That means host countries and buyers must negotiate clear agreements that define the responsibilities, the timelines, and the safeguards. And without that trust and alignment, the market cannot function. And second, on rigorous monitoring, tracking, and reporting. So every ITMO must be backed by robust monitoring and tracking. And this is why organizations like CACE put so much emphasis on building countries' capacities.
And trust, you mentioned integrity there. Trust is central to the way this is supposed to work as well. If you look at Article 6.4, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, it looks to support projects involving both public and private actors. When it comes to verifying these emission reductions, the challenge of verification remains very much real. What mechanisms have been established to ensure the credibility of the verification? And could you provide some concrete examples of successful projects in terms of how it should work?
Yeah, so very good question again, because credibility is the cornerstone of Article 6.4. And if the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism is to succeed, countries and investors must have confidence that every ton of emission reduction is real and additional and permanent. And verification under Article 6.4 builds on decades of experience with the clean development mechanism and has three key safeguards. Independent verification by UNFCCC accredited third parties. Second, also centralized oversight by the supervisory body under the UNFCCC. This ensures that applied methodologies are consistent, robust, and transparent. And host country authorization. So no project moves forward without national approval and authorization. And this guarantees alignment with the national climate strategies and targets and prevents also double counting through corresponding adjustments. So it means that the project must use a UNFCCC approved Paris aligned methodology, establish a baseline scenario, monitor emissions reductions, and undergo third-party verification before credits can be issued. And then maybe a quick example. which is still from the CDM era because Article 6.4 is not fully operational yet. So there is, for example, large-scale renewable energy projects in India, for example, a wind farm in Tamil Nadu, which generates millions of tons of verified emission reductions, while at the same time reducing dependence on coal and creating local jobs. And another example is from Africa, where improved, more efficient cook stoves in Rwanda, in Uganda, Burkina Faso, and other countries reduce biomass use and ultimately deforestation. And all these projects not only generate carbon credits, but they also have immediate health and gender benefits. For example, by reducing indoor air pollution or freeing up time for women and children.
Yeah, and let's move from 6.4 to 6.8 and stay on that sort of theme around trust and the credibility of the process, because 6.8 of the Paris Agreement looks at non-market approaches to try and ensure that things like technology transfer, capacity building, and policy coordination is part of what happens here. I guess the idea of that is to ensure equitable collaboration and not just abuse of one country or one company buying and offsetting their carbon footprint. Can you give us some examples of real world projects where 6.8 has been impacted, perhaps maybe in the GCC?
Yeah, so in general, Article 6 is less visible than the market approaches, but it is equally important because, as you said, it creates space for non-market cooperation, such as policy alignment, training, capacity building. It may not rely on tradable credits, but it can be equally impactful and also accelerate climate action. And one example is South-South cooperation on renewable energy. Through partnerships supported by multilateral organizations, countries in Africa and Asia have received knowledge transfer and technical training to expand solar and wind power. These projects did not rely on carbon crediting, but they build long-term capacity by training engineers, creating local supply chains, and helping governments also to design the supportive policies around it. And another example comes from regional policy coordination. In Latin America, for example, several countries have worked together on common frameworks for sustainable forest management and adaptation planning. There is no market transaction, but these initiatives support policy alignment, data sharing, and they also strengthen institutions across the borders.
And you mentioned at the start of this conversation, Dr. Alexandra, about your time at the UNDP. Several roles you had there looking at climate change mitigation and carbon finance. And in 2021, looking at the research, you helped establish the Carbon Payments for Development program. Tell us a bit about the mission and its impact.
Yeah, so it was a very formative part of my professional journey with UNDP. And I had the privilege of working with governments and partners to design and launch the Carbon Payment for Development program. The mission of this program, in short, CP4D, was quite simple but powerful: to make carbon markets accessible to countries and communities that had historically been left out, because many developing countries lacked the institutional capacity to participate in carbon markets under the CDM, under the Kyoto mechanism. But this meant they were also missing out on both direct foreign investment and opportunities for sustainable development. And CP4D was created to close that gap.
And just a question, if we zoom out about the geopolitics, because this is a world that seems to be becoming more fragmented, at least from a global geopolitical perspective. Do you anticipate that that's going to have an impact and slow down the advancement of global green policies that have characterized, I guess it's fair to say, much of the past decade? If you look at the United States, for example, pulling out of the agreement again, also tensions there with Brazil, the host of this, over political issues. Do you think this is going to have a negative effect on how we move forward with climate change policies?
I mean, it's true that today's geopolitical tensions, whether we are speaking about conflicts, trade disputes, or energy security concerns, can create headwinds for global climate policy in the short term. And governments often then shift the focus toward immediate priorities that can sometimes slow down or delay ambitious commitments. But I would not say this means a retreat from green policies. In fact, what we have seen repeatedly is that crisis often accelerates the energy transition rather than stall it. For example, the war in the Ukraine highlighted the vulnerabilities of fossil fuel dependency and spurred record investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency in Europe. So while geopolitics may complicate the process, they also strengthen the case for diversification, resilience, and clean energy. And at the global level, the Paris Agreement has created already a framework that keeps countries engaged, regardless of political cycles. So even when ambition slows temporarily, I think the underlying trend is clear. Renewables are now the cheapest form of power in most parts of the world. Low carbon technologies are gaining market share, and investors increasingly see climate risk as a financial risk. And these drivers are not going away.
Absolutely, and I think that financial imperative is an important one that could perhaps spur the long-term growth of these policies and technologies, despite the shorter term politics. Let's talk about COP30 then in Brazil. What do you expect to be the outcomes from that?
COP30 is, of course, a very symbolic moment because it marks 10 years since the Paris Agreement with the second global stocktake. The world has to really honestly assess progress and raise the ambition that was raised over the last decade. So I expect three things. First, more ambitious national pledges that show we are still serious about the Paris Agreement target. Second, a strong focus on forests and nature-based solutions, which is also fitting given that Belém is in the heart of the Amazon. And third, also real momentum on Article 6, which countries finally moving from negotiation to actual implementation. But of course, one of the big missing pieces remains the United States. Their lack of consistent engagement has really left a gap in both ambition and finance. And this makes it even more important for other countries and for other regional leaders, for example, Brazil, the EU, the GCC, to step forward. So my hope for COP30 is that it delivers not just words, but really concrete action, more finance, and stronger cooperation to keep us on course.
An optimistic note there and assessment. Let's finish with a bit of a personal question, if I may. You touched on the importance of forestry as part of solutions. You, of course, grew up in the pristine forests of Austria, as you've mentioned before. How has that experience influenced your values today and the sorts of leadership style you've implemented throughout your career?
Yes, no, it's true. I grew up surrounded by the forests of Austria, and that experience, of course, shaped me. So being close to nature gave me not only an appreciation for nature, but also the awareness of how fragile nature is and how much we depend on it. So that sense of responsibility has stayed with me throughout my life. And in my professional work, it translates into two things. First, I would say a commitment to integrity. Just as nature functions only if the ecosystem is intact, I believe climate finance and carbon markets must be built on trust, on transparency and high standards. Without integrity, the whole system breaks down. And also it shaped my leadership style because the forest taught me respect for independence. And I try to lead in the same way. So by bringing diverse partners together and creating an environment where collective action is really possible, because climate challenges are too big for any one actor to solve alone. And collaboration is really absolutely essential.
A positive note to end on then, and I can vouch that it is a beautiful part of the world, and let's hope that efforts to tackle climate change can help many countries, including Austria, try and protect some of those natural wonders. But that's all we have time for, Dr. Alexandra Soezer. Thank you so much for joining us on behalf of the Al-Attiyah Foundation. I'd like to thank you for your time today and providing our listeners with valuable insights on sustainable finance and your work with the CACE. The foundation wishes you the best of luck with the work you're doing and very much looks forward to continuing this conversation with you soon.
Thank you so much. And it has been really a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandra. And thank you, of course, for listening. A new Al-Attiyah podcast will be released in the coming weeks.